Okay, I'd invite you to join me in Zephaniah 3. This is a beautiful end to the book of Zephaniah. In chapter 1, Zephaniah had described the looming and great, terrible day of Yahweh, primarily the significant aspect of that day being this cosmic and covenantal judgment, the undoing of creation. And in chapter 2, Zephaniah then called Judah to repentance, whether they escape the day of the Lord or not. This is the proper response to what God has said, to his coming in this great day. God's future judgment of the surrounding nations, the Philistines, Moab and Ammon, Cush and Assyria, established the certainty and the scope of God's coming judgment. We'll say a word now about Cush. We had some questions about that at the end of the week last week. So Cush, as we were looking through last week, it's kind of a literary exception because it was the shortest of the oracles against these other nations. Just one verse in chapter 2, verse 12. You Ethiopians, or you Cushites to the south also, you shall be slain by my sword. So the main mention of the Cushites that we see, so this is back in Genesis chapter 10 in the table of nations. Cush is the son of Ham. And they go to the south and establish themselves in the Egypt, Ethiopia, and the in-between the surrounding area. That's kind of where they were. And so this nation, as we've seen throughout, they did interact pretty consistently with Egypt. They were known as kind of the nation to the east, the southeast of the Nile, and Egypt is more on the northwest side of the Nile. And so they interacted historically quite a bit with Egypt. And then we have seen a little bit of Israel and primarily Judah's interaction with them. As was pointed out last week, this time in history is immediately following a time when the Cushites were reigning in Egypt as well. Historically, Egypt has dominion over the Cushites, but during this period of time, Cush was reigning in Egypt. And so that may answer our question of why Zephaniah chooses to identify Cush instead of Egypt, because this was who he would have known to be the reigning nation down in the south. The other reason that perhaps he identified Cush instead of Egypt is because Egypt is further south, or Cush is further south than Egypt was. And we'll see today that one of God's points in his redemption of the nation, some of the nations, is that he's going to gather people from extremely far away. And the only example that Zephaniah uses of that is that it's beyond the river to the south of Cush. And so he may be literally using sort of the extremes of north, south, east, west. So it's the furthest southern enemy that they know of and that they possess, and is still a great nation. So those are some of the thoughts, some of the recommendations, that they did have historical interaction with them. Cush did have historical interaction with Egypt. Probably the most likely reason that Zephaniah identifies them is either because they were the ruling power down south at the time, or because they are further south, and what Zephaniah wants to establish is that God is going beyond even known nations. Like he's reaching far into the people groups to gather for himself a purified people, worshipers. Okay, so that's maybe a little bit more about Cush than we had last week. So this week, there's kind of three sections in chapter 3. Verses 1 through 8, which is particularly addressed to the city Jerusalem. And feminine pronouns are used about her. So there's after addressing all the nations and calling Judah to repentance, now Zephaniah and the Lord turn their attention to the city itself, and that's verses 1 through 8, really identifying her wickedness and her pollution and how far she has fallen, even though she was this chosen place where God and his word abide. Okay? So that's the dark moment in chapter 3. And then really the morning dawns, because starting in verse 9, and verses 9 through 13, that is Zephaniah communicating in first person, so this is God's words, what God's intention is for the future, what he's going to do, maybe the other primary aspect of the day of the Lord. It's not just judgment, though that is a very significant and even chronologically earlier portion, like that's what comes first, is this great judgment, but that's not all that the day of the Lord is about. And he begins to, or not just begins, he really thoroughly describes, God does, in chapter 3, verses 9 through 13, what else he's going to do. And simply put, it's purify a people for himself. That's what he's going to do. And so then 14 through 20 is the third section, and that really describes the result and the ongoing reality following what God does and establishing a pure people is this back and forth enjoyment of one another, that the people enjoy and they praise and they sing to Yahweh. And then in a really beautiful and simple poem of his nearness, God describes his love for these people that he has purified. Okay? So that's kind of where we're going tonight. That's how Zephaniah's prophecies end. So, verses 1 through 8 first. Having addressed the enemies to the west, Philistines to the east, Moab and Ammon to the south, Cush, and to the north, Assyria. Zephaniah, by the word of the Lord, now gazes at the center of that compass, you might say, Jerusalem herself. Let's read the first 8 verses. Woe to her who is rebellious and polluted, to the oppressing city. She has not obeyed his voice. She has not received correction. She has not trusted in the Lord. She has not drawn near to her God. Her princes in her midst are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves that leave not a bone till morning. Her prophets are insolent, treacherous people. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. The Lord is righteous in her midst. He will do no unrighteousness. Every morning he brings his justice to light. He never fails, but the unjust knows no shame. I have cut off nations. Their fortresses are devastated. I have made their streets desolate with none passing by. Their cities are destroyed. There is no one, no inhabitant. I said, surely you will fear me. You will receive instruction so that her dwelling place or her dwelling would not be cut off. Despite everything for which I corrected or punished her, but they rose early and corrupted all their deeds. Therefore, wait for me, says the Lord, until the day I rise up for plunder. My determination is to gather the nations to my assembly of kingdoms, to pour on them my indignation, all my fierce anger. All the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. Okay, pretty straightforward organization in this first portion. So starting in verse 1, there are 3 characteristics of the city. She is rebellious, she is polluted, and she is oppressing. So she has this refusal to follow Yahweh. She denies his principle and wants to walk as far away from them as she can. She is polluted. She has this disqualifying uncleanness. He's not just talking about, some internal spiritual reality, while that is certainly true. He is also talking about their external activity. What the city is doing, how it acts, is very polluted. It is very unclean. It is unfit for worship. And it is also oppressing. And this was one of the qualities that Israel was intended particularly to avoid because of what they had experienced in Egypt, because Egypt had oppressed its visitor, Egypt had oppressed its foreigner. As Israel moved out of Egypt, one of the distinguishing features of this nation was to be that it was not an oppressing nation, that it didn't oppress its visitors, that it didn't that brother and slave or brother and servant in Israel would not be oppressed in the same way that foreign nations oppressed. Okay, and yet now, not only is oppression found in the city, oppression is that which characterizes the city. This is who she is in total, in sum. So after, we might ask, how did this happen? As we began Zephaniah, we were reading quite a bit about Josiah and how he was, rediscovering the law, and these things had been lost, and it was almost unfamiliar, completely new. The Passover hasn't been practiced in many years. And it is, so we might have this maybe idealized view of what Jerusalem looked like even in its uncleanness. But it's a pretty dark picture. So I just wanted to read a portion from Lamentations. This is a description of how far Zion has fallen. Lamentations is going to be written just following the fall of Jerusalem. And he describes it in this way. He says, chapter 4, verse 11, "The Lord has fulfilled his fury. He has poured out his fierce anger. He kindled a fire in Zion, and it has devoured its foundation. The kings of the earth," so Philistines, Cush, all these people, they and all the inhabitants of the world, they would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem because of the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who shed in her midst the blood of the just. They wandered blind in the streets. They've defiled themselves with blood so that no one would touch their garments. They, the kings of the earth and the inhabitants of the world, cried out to them, the people of the city, "Go away, unclean! Go away, go away! Do not touch us!" When they fled and wandered, those among the nations said, "They shall no longer dwell here." The face of the Lord scattered them. He no longer regards them, the people who do not respect the priests nor show favor to the elders. So even the nations at this point in Israel's history are looking at Israel and they say, "Wow, what a violent, oppressive place. That place is where the priests shed the blood of the innocent. That's no secret." And so it just helps us to be sure that we are thinking rightly. Zephaniah is not being dramatic, or he's not painting this. He's not looking at relatively purified people, and he's saying, guys, we could do better. That judge is unjust. No, this is who the people are. It's a very dark picture. And so there are a series of 4 accusations as we consider this reality that here's a quote from a commentator who says, "Privilege has become the occasion for greater sin." And what he means by that is that Israel has been privileged with the voice of, the covenant of, the love of God. Jerusalem had received the voice and the relationship with God in a unique way. None of the other cities or nations in chapter 2 had received his voice in this way. And yet, Jerusalem still stubbornly refuses and looks much like the nations look. So she hasn't obeyed his voice. She hasn't received correction. She has not trusted in the Lord. She has not drawn near to her God. This is the 4-fold accusation. This first one, obeyed, is the Hebrew word Shema, which is most often translated hear. That's why the Shema prayer in Deuteronomy is called that, because it begins with the word hear. And so that's why it's called that. But this concept in Hebrew of hearing is far more than simply something that's audible. Whether or not you heard is demonstrated by whether or not you obeyed. Your actions reveal whether you heard, right? So a father to a son, my son, take out the trash, and the son sits there, and then the father begins again, my son, take, and the son interrupts and says, I heard you the first time. The Hebrew father might say, no, you didn't. If you had heard me, you would be taking out the trash. So that's kind of the idea. So when they haven't obeyed his voice, they're not hearing him. That's why in this case it's translated obey, because those two ideas are very closely connected. Hearing something audibly and responding to it appropriately. It's very connected, at least in the book of Proverbs, to this word, correction. She's not received correction. That is most commonly translated instruction, and can mean either something that is verbal or something that is corporal. So you might often instruct someone verbally in order to prevent them from doing wrong. And then once they have done wrong, you might instruct them corporally that they don't continue in doing wrong. Sort of the idea. There's different ways, a variety of tools in the instructor's toolbox. And so what God is saying here is, my voice you did not hear, my words you haven't obeyed, neither have you received, in this case, correction, neither have you received discipline, my hand against you. It didn't matter the way I taught you, you didn't want it. Those first two are kind of a pair, and the second two are a pair. She has not trusted in the Lord. She has not drawn near to her God. Now, all of these things together, like hearing and instruction and trusting in the Lord, are all, as you know, like my head and my heart are a lot in Proverbs right now. And this sounds very much like the early moments of Proverbs, perhaps even the most significant or one of the most well-known Proverbs is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And what they haven't done any of it. They haven't listened to Solomon whatsoever. They're not hearing. They don't care about correction. They don't care about the words. They don't care about the Lord and walking with him, trusting him, drawing near to him would be it's often an idiom for worship. They don't care about his worship system. It's all cast by the wayside. She is rebellious. She is polluted. She is oppressing instead. A sad exchange. So then, in the very clear movement, we now move to the leadership. So who in the city should we hold responsible? Well, according to the prophets, we've seen time and time again, it's the leaders. And so we have first the civil leaders, the princes and the judges, and then we also have the religious leaders, the prophets and the priests. All of them are to be held accountable. These first two are described in pictures of devouring animals. So we have a roaring lion and we have an evening wolf who, characteristic about him is he's insatiable. He is not going to leave a bone till morning. No leftovers. Nothing left to be picked over. It's going to be completely devoured between evening and morning. So in a very short period of time, they're ravenous. They're out for blood. They are a lot like this gang of people who calls, we're going to lie in wait for innocent blood. And it doesn't matter who they are. We just want to take something from them, whether it's the kid's lollipop or the grandpa's inheritance. I don't care. I just want it. And I'm going to shed their blood for it. This is who they are. Roaring lions, evening wolves. But it's not just the civil leaders. It's the religious ones too. Her prophets. So now the prophet of God takes shots at his contemporaries, which is instructive, once again, just for the character of the city as a whole. There are many false prophets in Judah and Israel at this time. Many people who are simply seeking, if you pay me, I will say a good word to you from God. If you don't, You don't put something in my mouth, I will say that God is here to curse you, right? That's sort of the nature of the false prophets in this day. And so he's saying you're insolent, you're treacherous, you're not faithful to God, you haven't received a word from him. He's condemning his contemporaries. And the priests as well, they've polluted the sanctuary, and the second quality of them is that they've done violence to the law. So these people who have the responsibility to distinguish between that which is holy and that which is common, these priests who have the responsibility to uphold that which is right and eschew that which is wrong, that they would promote righteousness and put down wickedness. Those very people, the religious leaders, the upholders of how God has called them to worship, to draw near to himself, when they no longer value drawing near to the presence of God, when they no longer value the gift that God is, that his presence is to Jerusalem, then disorientation of the entire system follows. There is no orientation at that point. There is no order. There is no morality. There is no right and wrong. When we cease to hear the voice of God as it concerns his requirements, his desires, his intentions, then all manner of confusion follows. So the keepers of holy worship have assaulted God and manipulated his people. This is how bad it is. Very sharp contrast. So if that's who Jerusalem is, if that's who the city is, then what is God like who lives there? What is God like who dwells there? Very different. The Lord is righteous in her midst. And that's going to be particularly precious, this idea, in what's coming. Because the day of the Lord is going to promote a nearness of God that has not been seen before, except perhaps in the garden. Like, this is an unusual nearness that we will experience in the day of the Lord. The Lord is righteous. He's there. He's in our midst. His presence is with his people. And he will do no unrighteousness. He does not follow these false priests, these wicked civil and religious leaders. He doesn't follow. He doesn't take cues from them. He is still himself. He is who he has said that he is. He will do no unrighteousness. Every morning, or morning by morning, he brings his justice to light. When the sun comes up, God is pursuing his justice every day. No matter what the people around him are doing, no matter what his people are doing, this is what he's about. He will maintain his character. So there's a bit of a set-apartness here, isn't there? Even though he's near to them, he's in the city, but he is definitely distinct from their rebellion, pollution, and oppression. He never fails. In contrast to the unjust, who you recall from last week, who don't know any shame. There's nothing they won't do and blush. They don't blush at their sin. So then 6 through 8, this near, righteous, just God speaks. And here's sort of the picture that he's painting here in 6 and 7 is he's saying, I would have thought, not that he's learning anything new, but I would have thought that my past instruction to you would have taught you to live righteously. You would have thought that when I cut off the nations, when I devastated their fortresses, when I made their streets desolate with no one passing by, so that there was not a person left in the streets. In fact, there's not even a person left in the city. Right? You can see all the parallelism here. Nation, devastated, streets, desolate, none passing by, cities destroyed, no inhabitant. No one's even left. I would have thought when I did that you would have said, we fear you. We're grateful that you have drawn near to us. We want to respond with fidelity. We want to respond with emet. We want to respond with faithfulness as you have been faithful to us. Right? I would have thought that. Surely you will fear me. Surely you will receive instruction so that you won't become like all of them. Right? You would have thought that you didn't want to cast your lot in with the nations. You watched it. You saw what I did in Egypt. And you want to be like them? Apparently you do. Look at Jerusalem. It's just like Egypt. Despite everything for which I corrected you, like I showed you time and time again, I showed you verbally, I showed you corporally, I showed you in the wilderness, I showed you in the conquest, I showed you through prophets, I showed you through judges, I showed you even through the kings, I showed you constantly. And I corrected even throughout that time. But it didn't work. They rose early and they corrupted all their deeds. So the intention of God's correction, historically with Israel, you could say it failed. You could say it didn't accomplish its perceived intention. Right? That even in the writing of Proverbs or in the writing of these prophets, what they're supposed to do is to repent and believe. What they're supposed to do is be faithful. And they haven't. Instead, they've poured every bit of energy into even rising early and getting up before the sun is up. Why? So that I can do more corrupt things. So that I can fill my house completely with the spoil of unjust gains. So that I can just satisfy my lusts, so that I can get more power, so that I can afflict more just people. Like that's what he's saying they're doing. Everything about them is poured out against him. And so, verse 8 is his, okay, so because that's the case, and even an instruction, a word to the righteous people, wait. My day is coming. Wait for me until the day that I rise up for plunder. My determination, communicating his intent that day, my determination is to gather the nations to my assembly of kingdoms and to pour on them my indignation, all my fierce anger, all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. So in the same way that a long time ago you saw me cut off nations and their fortresses and you saw me empty cities, so in a far greater way, I will do that completely, and because you have cast your lot in with them, you are included. So it's still pretty dark for Jerusalem, probably the darkest moment for them so far. But that's where things turn, because as God continues speaking, he still continues being the active speaker through verse 13. So all of 9 through 13. This is where Yahweh promises, just as he said before, my determination is to do this, is to gather the nations for destruction. I have another determination. There's a second purpose of my day. And it is to fashion out of the ashes of my wrath a pure people. I am going to purify what remains, this remnant, these that are even waiting, though they go through this day of the Lord. So 9 through 13, let's read that. For then, again, in that day, this is the day of the Lord, I will restore to the peoples a pure language, a pure tongue. Keep that in mind. That they may all call upon, with their mouths, the name of the Lord, to serve him with one accord. From beyond the rivers of Cush, from Ethiopia, same people as before, my worshipers, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering. In that day, you shall not be ashamed, or you shall not be shamed for any of your deeds in which you transgress against me. For then I will take away from your midst those who rejoice in your pride, and you shall no longer be haughty in my holy mountain. I will leave in your midst a meek and a humble people, and they shall trust in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel shall do no unrighteousness, and speak with their mouths as tongues no lies, nor shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. For they shall feed their flocks and lie down, and no one shall make them afraid. Now that is a far different and a very beautiful scene. That is a utopian scene. So that is the removal, the cleansing of all evil, and all that remains is that which is righteous and pure. And that's exactly what God is promising to do. So just to note all of this, the tongue, the language, call upon. And then here, no lies, no deceitful tongue. So there's a bit of bookends that are going on there with this purity of speech, this purity of language. It sort of does call to mind the Isaiah image of the coal that touches his tongue, and he is purified, his mouth is purified. So the purpose of this pure language, the purpose of God doing an intentional work of fashioning this people, is that it produces a people who call on the name of the Lord. And that's precisely what they are not doing right now, right? So that's the intention. And not only in mouth or in voice do they do this, do they call on his name, but in activity they serve him as well. This one accord is actually one shoulder. And the image is that they're all unified, and they all put their shoulder down to the same, like a plow image, but there's only one rather than two. They all have the same purpose. They're all moving in the same direction. And this lowly shoulder even sort of foreshadows this lowly, like a service. There's service involved in one shoulder sort of activity. And that's what he's fashioning, is a people who are pure in their mouth and in their bodies, in their speech and in their activity. And what it is oriented around is lowly, humble service. We're all unified around that. And the location from which he's drawing these people is not only the city. It's not only Jerusalem or only Judah or only Israel. Instead, and it's not even only Cush or only Philistia or Moab and Ammon or only Assyria. It's actually beyond those borders, beyond the people that they know of, the people that they interact with. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, he is bringing children. He is bringing the daughters of his dispersed ones. So Judah that's about to be dispersed, Israel that has been destroyed, they have these children. He's not talking about physical children, daughters of his dispersed ones, his worshipers, his daughters. These are worshipers from out of ethnic Israel. And he's assembling them to himself in order to bring pure speech, pure activity, and even pure gifts, pure everything. And so they do that. They're going to do that as part of what his purpose is in this day. And then this is the first time that we've actually had it explicitly mentioned that it's going to be related to the day of God. Certainly it's alluded to for then, and even in chapter 2 when he's talked about the judgment of the nations, there were moments of sort of brightness for Judah, that God was going to bring some restoration, or they would be able to plunder some of these other nations type of an idea. But this is the first time in the very explicitly Day of the Lord book that the day of the Lord is viewed positively. And what's associated with it is the loss of guilt. In that day, the people will be free from guilt. They will be free from shame. They will have no longer a need to hang their head at what they have done. Because God is going to take away from in their midst all arrogance. So there is now a union of kind of both ideas of the judgment and the purity, that the one, as we've said this before, but the one really creates or is a part of creating the other. That the removal of the arrogant people and even the arrogance from within the remaining, that it is God's work in taking away, in purging pride. That's the only way that you're left with humility. That's the only way that you're left with a humble people, a people who are pure in speech, in activity, one shoulder, all together, bringing offerings. It's because God took away all the pride. That's how it happens. It's his mode of accomplishing that. So he has to take away those who rejoice in pride, and then you will no longer be haughty, arrogant in my holy mountain. So we're moving closer now to the people that are fit for the place where God's presence lives. This probably should have been on the previous slide too. So that's the result. Here's what's left. After all of the reducing, here's what you're left with. And that, I'm just going to read, look at verse 12 as I read chapter 2, verse 3. Seek the Lord, all you meek of the earth, who have upheld his justice. Seek righteousness, seek humility. It may be that you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. Now, he said, it will be that you are hidden, and it's these same people, this meek, humble, trusting in the name of Yahweh people. And so as we just continue painting this picture, then what are these people doing? So we know that they're serving him with one accord, they're bringing him offerings, but they're also doing no unrighteousness. That is divine. That's what God is doing. God does no unrighteousness. And he's going to make a people that are doing the same thing he's doing, unlike historical Israel. Well, do no unrighteousness. There's no reason for a lie. Why would I lie? Why would I have a deceitful tongue? God's given me a pure tongue. And the last moment in the picture is, this is probably better translated, not that they feed their flocks and lie down, but that the image is that they are the flock. These people eat and they rest, and God is the shepherd. This king, the shepherd king, is there, and there is nothing to be afraid of. So if you think of a utopia, even a humanly imagined one, they're very fragile things. Because when the disease gets in, when the virus corrupts the system, it's nice while it lasts, but none of them last. And you end up very quickly with dystopian stories because something went terribly wrong. And you could say that that's not dissimilar from our story too, if Eden is the first utopia. We're in the middle of a dystopian novel, you might say. But there will come a day when, as this society is created in his perfection and the complete removal of all impurity, the complete removal of all evil, that the only thing that's left is completely refined, pure gold, and it's untouchable. That shepherd will no longer let any wolf into that flock. Eternally so. So these people feast on his goodness, and we eat all the good grass because all that there is good grass. And then we lie down and sleep, and we sleep sweetly because there is no wolf. There is no evil. Not in me, not out of me, nowhere. Because the shepherd king showed up. And he brought it's his day. And he's judging, and he's purifying, and he's molding and creating so that this is all that's left. It's a stunning picture. And it is our hope. It's our future picture, right? So what do we do with that picture? Sing, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away your judgments. He has cast out your enemy. The King of Israel, Yahweh, is in your midst. You shall see disaster no more. In that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, do not fear. To Zion, let not your hands be weak. The Lord your God is in your midst. The mighty one will save. He will also rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Then God has the last word. I will gather those who sorrow over the appointed assembly who are among you, to whom it's broken, or whom its reproach is a burden. Behold, at that time, I will deal with all who afflict you. I will save the lame and gather those who were driven out. I will appoint them for praise and fame in every land where they were put to shame. At that time, I will bring you back, even at the time I gather you, for I will give you fame and praise among all the peoples of the earth, when I return your captives before your eyes, says the Lord. And the book ends. So the result is this indescribable jubilation. What began in chapter 1 with utter consumption of everything and the complete reversal of creation in this one of the darkest pictures painted in the Old Testament, now is one of the brightest. Now it is a threefold call to supreme rejoicing, where he says, these same people, the daughter of Zion, Israel, the daughter of Jerusalem, the true remnant of the corrupt reality, is supposed to call out and sing and make songs and make melody to the Lord in their hearts. Everything is going to be okay, is kind of this call. And there's a future hope. Rejoice with all of your heart. So with shalom, with a completely uncut heart, with all of it, you have given it all to God. All your eggs were in this basket, and it's going to work out. And now we see a lot of the things from the second section just reiterated. A lot of the taking away the judgments, which was the removal of shame and the removal of guilt. There is now no condemnation. It's the idea. And then the presence of God, which was mentioned early in Jerusalem and also in the second portion, this now more than ever, and he describes him with a kind of this litany of titles, the King of Israel, the Yahweh, he's in your midst. And then the complete removal of evil. All these cycles are just on round two. You'll see disaster no more. In that day, it will be said in the same place that I promise supreme devastation in Jerusalem. Now in that day in Jerusalem, no more fear. In that day in Zion, don't let your hands be weak. And the idea of not letting your hands be weak is activity. It is fullness. It is that society will be restored, that we will be going about our business. There will be marketplaces, and there will be farms, and there will be these things that are happening, occurring, because our hands are active in peace. We have no need to defend against anything. God did that. He accomplished that. But now we simply rest and work in great joy. So don't let your hands be weak. Once again, we just have this, who he is, where he is, the mighty one. He's going to save. That's a beautiful line. I think the mighty one is the Hebrew word gibor, which is used of these strong and terrible and mighty warriors. David's mighty men is the Giborim, plural. And so God is this great Gibor. And that's intended to communicate strength, and it's intended to communicate propensity to violence. And the pair for it, the descriptor of him, this mighty, you might say, hero, potential villain, or hero, because that's what happens when you have somebody who's strong and prone to violence. You either have a hero or a villain. and this one is prone to save. He uses his strength to accomplish salvation. So he's a mighty hero, would be a wonderful translation of that. The mighty hero is in our midst. He showed up. And here is the threefold maybe song, poem about his love for his people. So this is all about what we're doing. We rejoice, we sing, there's removal of judgment, there's all this beautiful stuff happening because God's here for us. But what about him? He's singing too. Over us. He is overwhelmed by what he has made. Not overwhelmed emotionally, like we get overwhelmed. Maybe overwhelmed's not the right word, but the emotion is intended. That he sings just as we're singing. There's this back and forth song as we worship him and he rejoices in us. He'll rejoice over you with gladness. The middle line is tricky, and I don't think this is probably the best translation. This is a song about what God is doing, that he rejoices over the people in gladness. He is quiet in his love. He will rejoice over us with singing. So the first the first and last line are very similar. And the middle, I believe, is intended to communicate the same, the peace that the people have in him. He also has a peace with his people. In his love for us, as he has finished his work, he too is at rest. He too is quiet in that regard, calm, unstirred. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He will. I think. I mean, the word is like quiet, like volume-wise, but there's even in English there's the implication that something that is quiet is quieted, like calmed, and that seems to be the implication that he is at rest too. So the Holy One is breaking out in joyful song over the once sinners, now worshipers, finished the work being done. He's content. So here's his final word, 18 through 20. His commitment, even. I will gather those who sorrow over the appointed assembly who are among you, to whom its reproach is a burden. Behold, at that time I will deal with all who afflict you. I will save the lame and gather those who were driven out. I will appoint them for praise and fame in every land where they were put to shame. So these are all ideas we've seen throughout the book, so there's not much need to reiterate them. But this idea of in the assembling of people who have been suffering for a long time, one of his words of comfort is that he promises to deal with the afflictors. And he's going to deal with them, as we know throughout the prophets, in the same way that they've been dealing out affliction multiplied. And in that work, he's going to restore all that which was broken. So there's very Ecclesiastes language. The what once was snapped, what God snapped, he's going to bind again. He's going to make whole. He broke the bone, he's going to set the bone and heal the bone, save the lame, gather those who were driven out. And then, cherry on top, is this, it's not just that you're restored. He's appointed his people for adulation, for praise, for that they will be seen as that which is holy. They will be viewed for who he has made them to be, that they are his people. They reflect him. They bring glory to his name, and they receive praise in all the places that they had been put to shame. When he restores, when he brings back, when he puts together, when he gathers, what that is something that deserves to be praised. And God is going to accomplish that. The last two words are these two words. Like the final word of all the prophecy is Yahweh. Right? Says Yahweh. Therefore, as we reflected on the Truths Sunday, therefore we can trust it. Because he is a God who speaks true things. And he's a God that is loyal to that which he speaks. He is chesed and he is emet. So it's a stunning picture. When God comes to do this, it's going to be the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, whichever way you want to look at it. And it will be two sides of the same coin. If the day of the Lord is the coin, then we have the judgment side and we have the restoration side. And in the restoration, the picture that's painted of hope is stunning. That we will be very different even than we are right now. There will be no lying. We do that sometimes. There will be no deception. There will be complete purity of tongue, purity of desire, because there will be, as he was in Jerusalem during the middle of all the wickedness, so we, in the middle of all the peace, will be completely righteous. There will be no unrighteousness whatsoever in us, outside of us, or in this new world, in this new Jerusalem, this new earth. So, there's a lot to think about, a lot to rejoice in, but we'll just open it up for a moment for any questions or other considerations before we close this book, before we close the book of Zephaniah, this consideration of the day of the Lord.
It's always the recurring theme of with the wicked. You see it in Exodus that they rose up early when they built the idol to commit their debauchery and whatnot. A lot of similarities in Isaiah. Those who rise early to drink wine. And what you hit on earlier in Zephaniah, like the Lord was saying, I thought, surely you will fear me. Surely you will receive instruction. And the parable that he has in Isaiah 5 where he says about the vineyard, what more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done? I've done everything for you. And you're still not. Why are you bringing forth wild grapes? And Isaiah 1 where he talks about what good is it to discipline you? You won't receive correction. So again, it's kind of that recurring theme of I'm trying to get you awake. And I really like what you said about hearing and obeying. That you're not hearing me because you're not obeying me. Yet you know, I've spoken. What more can I do for you?
Right. Yeah, so there's kind of two thoughts. The first one, that early is used both positively and negatively throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
And it is intending to communicate, like, the degree of devotion to that thing is demonstrated by a willingness, perhaps, to cut rest short or to prioritize. It is the first thing. There's an affection that's reflected when we rise early for something, right? And so that good or bad, that's reflected. Rise early for prayer and devotion, or rise early to do wicked things. So I think I agree with you. It is used in a variety of places. Then on the just different ways, like you would think that your response to what I've done, these demonstrations, this instruction, even examples of judgment, all of that should have produced something. It reminded me of, say, Isaiah 1. It reminded me of Amos when we went through there in chapter 4. When he's like, I gave you cleanness of teeth in all your cities and lack of bread in your places, yet you didn't return to me, says the Lord. I withheld rain from you. While there were still 3 months of the harvest, I made it rain in one city. I withheld rain from another city. One part was rained upon, and where it didn't rain, the part withered. So 2 or 3 cities wandered to the other to drink water, but they weren't satisfied. Yet you didn't return to me, says the Lord. I blasted you with blight and mildew. And he keeps going, yet you didn't return to me. I sent you a plague, yet you didn't return to me. I overthrew some of you, but you didn't return to me, says the Lord. Just time and time again, there's like a variety of ways that he is, even in this common grace, seeking to instruct, guide, move. Like, listen, if you would hear even the call of nature, what is she saying? She's declaring the glories of God. And for what it's worth, I think that's also reflected in parenting, that there are a variety of tools of instruction. And they're often, in a parent, it's like, well, let's try this. Well, let's try that. Well, how about this? Well, how about that? Like all these different ways of kind of promoting a similar idea or to call attention to a similar thing. And you're just kind of hoping that one of them will land in a way that God isn't hoping that one of them will land. But that's often what happens in parenting too, as God is fathering his people. Anyways. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's unquestioning who the active agent is in that. In both sides of the coin. It's unquestioning that God is the one that's judging. And it's unquestioning that he's the one that's forming a redeemed people. He's doing both of those things. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the cross and the resurrection.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great text that I'd probably use to point to the reality of the already not yet. So in a sense, Christians already have experienced the day of the Lord. The judgment part was absorbed by
Satisfied.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Right, satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can and we ought to, even in our yet vindicated bodies,
Sing.
lay down and have no
Right.
fear and sing and, because I have no shame and guilt. Not because I don't lie, but I have his righteousness in my place. So that's already true of us. And yet, we haven't yet fully realized it experientially in our flesh, in our body, which we're waiting for the day of the Lord. So I look at this and I was hearing and I'm thinking, how can you not read this and hear like an already not yet eschatology? A yes and, not an either or.
Yeah. We're pretty aware that we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And we're also very aware of as people with new eyes and with spiritual understanding, a measure of spiritual understanding, are very aware that some of these things are. I think that's a good way to think about it. And also, what I thought when you started, what I thought you were going to say, which is also a good principle that we've talked often about with eschatology, is that while Revelation, particularly the book, does unveil many more details, perhaps, of this day than Zephaniah does, the point of eschatology is not the details of the day of the Lord in their timing or in their order is not the primary point, that we sort that aspect out. While we can and do and seek to, we seek to sort. But that's not the biggest answer. Like, the biggest solution is not to have the perfect chart, but to respond with the right heart concerning the end. And it's interesting that at least in Zephaniah, which is one of the premier and, like you said, condensed package deals of judgment and hope, as we see those together, there aren't really many details of the order of events or even the specific nature of what these events exactly look like. He really is, it's a general principle. These are general principles that instruct how we live now, how we look at the future. I think that would be the most important thing to walk away with eschatology from, to walk away from eschatology with, is those sorts of principles. Not saying that we don't seek to sort out details, but yeah.
So I'm thinking of, like, if I was back in that day and listening to Zephaniah or reading Zephaniah, and I read, the Lord has taken away your judgments, cast out your enemy. He's been condemning.
Mm-hmm.
And now, he's blessing. And I'm thinking, well, how can that be? He just does it?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there something, when you're reading this, do you think there's got to be something in between the judgment and the blessing?
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm
Yeah.
going? I wonder if the first readers would think,
They have to
how
think
is this
that.
going to happen?
It does beg a question.
How can this happen? And,
Right.
And then when Jesus came on the scene, and then he dies and was buried and rose again, and you've been reading Zephaniah, and then Paul starts teaching in Romans.
Yeah.
There's got to be some kind of aha.
Yeah, and I think that even in the prophets, as you well know, we do have that. Like, we do have the description of the in-between. Most clearly in Isaiah, of course, Isaiah 53. And I think it's, is it Isaiah 20, I want to say 28. I have to look through here for a second. But this, the idea of no longer shameful, no longer guilty. That's in Romans 9 and in 1 Peter 2:9. They're both quoting Isaiah, I think, 28, where like it is grounded and first found in the Old Testament writings, which is a really important thing that we've been learning or reminded of in Genesis, is that this gospel of grace, the news of grace and the mercy of God, those are as old as humanity is. That's not, the New Testament is not the origin of grace. I think it sometimes can, that like strong line between the two is often even like, well, yeah, the angry God of the Old Testament and the good God of the New Testament. Like, that whole idea is just so it's been misled. Like, that's not even close. But yeah, it begs the question, how? I thought I was condemned. Now you're saying I won't be? Why? Isaiah 53.
For the unbelievers, on that day, they're going to be without excuse. Because, again, it's like, as God was always trying to reach out to Israel when they were in disobedience and rebellion, not responding. He puts a finality on it in the New Testament, Christ. It's like, okay, it is finished. No more excuses, you know. What else can I do for you? I've made the way of salvation for you now.
Well, he does do more, doesn't he? He then saves us.
Well, yeah,
So like, but that's it. It is an important next step.
that's, yeah, I mean, the invitation of,
Yeah.
you know, don't tell me that you can't have any hope.
Right. I just mean to be sure that we're clear that it is more than providing the way. He did more than provide the way. He then chose the people to accept the way, and he enabled them to do that. That's a big distinction. And so that's part of the Zephaniah point that Mary was kind of saying, is that it's not just like, look at him doing it, look at him doing it again, look at him making me sing, look at him making me say the truth, look at him he's doing this in me. And that's one of our most precious truths, is that he didn't just provide it, he then accomplished it. It's wonderful. No, it's not a corrective, it's just wanted to follow what you were saying with that. All right, we are over time. These are incredible truths. I hope that your heart is encouraged tonight.